Big data. Everyone wanted it, everyone got it, but now what do we do with it? It's so big. And as I like to say, are we sure procurement pros around the world actually know how to swim in these huge data lakes? If you're one of those procurement professionals who's anxiously sitting on an ever-increasing mountain of data, wondering how on earth to make sense of it all, it may be time to shift your mindset from data gatherer to hunter. Because data on its own means very little unless it provides insights that are actually actionable. An article published on Forbes late last year pointed out that we may have even already passed that point of peak data. Forrester Research estimates that as much as 60 to 73% of the data being collected is never successfully used for any strategic purpose. Procurement professionals are so used to a deluge of data that it often ends up downloaded onto someone's hard drive, manipulated into a variety of Excel spreadsheets, never to be seen again. Can our procurement teams do a better job in ensuring they get a decent ROI on their data? Hello, I'm Tanya Siri, founder of Procurious. Welcome to today's webinar, Basic Instinct. Are you a data hunter or a gatherer? I'm joined today by Marco Romano, Procurement Chief Analytics Officer, Global Procurement, Transformation Technology, IBM. Marco was the real brains behind our recent podcast series, Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, and fortunately we've coaxed him back again today, and Edward O'Donnell, Procurement Data Officer at IBM. Ed is truly passionate about data and has taken on this unique role at IBM with the mission to advance business, intelligence, deep analytics, and cognitive functionality across the procurement portfolio. Welcome to you both.
Hello, Tanya. Thanks for having us.
Likewise, a real thrill to have this opportunity to speak to the broad procurement community.
Thank you, gentlemen. To kickstart our discussion today, I'd like to start with you, Ed. You have the quite unusual title, but envious title, of Chief Data Officer for Procurement. Could you start by telling us a little bit about what this role involves and how it's contributing to cognitive success at IBM?
Thank you. I'd be glad to. Well, first let me set the stage and provide the environment and the background for what was heating up at the time that we made this announcement in IBM. And I really got to give Bob Murphy a lot of credit. He had a lot of anticipation about what was ensuing in the marketplace relative to the importance around data, and to create a new role a couple of years ago with my announcement inside that role. And if you're wondering what the environment was, certainly is not much different for IBM than most others managing the procurement practice. The ever-present need for transformation. For IBM, it was compounded by IBM's announcement, as you may recall, of the cognitive era and its deployment in scale across the enterprise. So several years ago, we were early in creating kind of this new cognitive domain and this new expertise. We were focused on healthcare at the time, and Bob really recognized, the vision that he had in his mind to accelerate what was then, what we call the cognitive capabilities inside IBM and IBM procurement. And if anyone knows Bob, that will be done sooner rather than later. So, the cognitive goal for procurement is really, to digitize our process, really, and put large-scale data insights to work, really, to be able to differentiate the company and the organization. Right. So what we think is winners and losers will be defined by their ability to put this new data, natural resources, we call it, to work for them, turning data intelligence, business intelligence, creating a data cube so that we can pass on analytics and what we also like to extend, by extension, call informed business decisions, those things that will augment and support the community of procurement practitioners with tools and analysis, right? So, the current digital strategy creates certainly new ways of doing things, In the past, we were all technology enabled predominantly, and we would, seek to replace our manual processes through a faster and more efficient way. This change with the digital area, we're going to take in concerns over social media, robotics, predictive analytics, artificial intelligence. So when you really look at the size, scale, and scope of the CDO role, we brought that in completely under one umbrella. And it is important because we're not only going after data, as you heard, that is structured, which is our traditional play, but also the unstructured, all of that hidden data that, as you heard earlier, may not be being put to use. And it's our goal in IBM to make sure that we actually work and develop that.
Thank you, Ed. I think, you've given us some real leads there on this next question, because I'm going to ask you about the ROI on this role of Chief Data Officer, because I know that a lot of CPOs out there will be envious of Bob having this important resource in his team. So, I guess just picking up on some of the points there, what did IBM see as the ROI on your role?
Yeah, there are two major areas that drive an ROI in the CDO role, or anyone in the similar role for organizations. Really, it's around IT infrastructure. What is it? What is the cost? To run and perhaps migrate all of these capabilities, to a cloud platform, making you more nimble and flexible and scalable. Right. So, the business case for a CDO role begins with, I believe, fully understanding procurement's teams, ambitions, their objectives, their goals, what their data management needs are, again, around analytics and cognitive. And it must be understood both at a tactical level, quarter to quarter, as well as, over the strategic horizon. Where are we going directionally with our data management, our data strategy plans? So this really, one of the earlier challenges was to, again, understand and migrate legacy architecture over to what we call in IBM, the IBM Cognitive Enterprise Data Platform. And of course, this is on the cloud. We believe this will reduce our run costs. It will enable Watson Cognitive APIs to converse with one another. Therefore, the ability to link what was once disparate data sets now can be merged for instructions that can enable conversation between the tools. So understanding the organization's current capability, architecture, IT infrastructure, understanding that becomes one essential important dimension, to make sure that we have solid data strategies in place. And then, of course, one that you're, immediately as I begin to bring it up now, you realize is, initiatives-driven value propositions, right? And what I'm talking about, there's those discrete and individual initiatives that our procurement professionals could create with stakeholders. They will explore and discover and develop initiatives that are identified to bring value. And generally, most of those initiatives return about a 10x annual return on investment, so that when we compete for investment dollars, and that's one of the roles of the CDOs, we go and we, compete at the CIO level in IBM or with the stakeholders, right, in the service lines and brands, and we have to put a value out there. The expectation is the hurdle rate for that is 10 to 1. So all of these different initiatives that we've created and the capabilities are done in that vein. And finally, we actually create a business case, and no surprise there, it's the hard rigor of understanding what it's going to take to stand it up, what the investments are, what that return on investment is. And part of the role is I will champion all of the initiatives under Bob's transformation project, petition the CIO, go to the stakeholders, make sure that they're as excited about these new capabilities as we are, meets the hurdle rate, and then we'll track that on a monthly basis to return and interlock with those stakeholders about the value proposition.
Marco, do you think the Chief Data Officer for Procurement is a title we're going to see more often in the future? Are there companies that you know of that are also following suit?
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, absolutely. Without question, these are roles we're going to see more and more in procurement. It may be a chief data officer or analytics officer or a variation of these, but certainly, they will become far more pervasive. We already see different roles or titles in other organizations, but really they all share the common mission to digitize, automate, create, sound data strategies and bring to fruition some sort of cognitive and analytics to deliver high level of business insights. But I will tell you, it doesn't stop at these roles. Just to give you an example, within procurement in IBM, we've got data scientists in our organization, data wranglers, and other technical skills. Now it's important to stress for the audience listening that we're not trying to create a CIO within procurement, but rather we're creating a set of skills that complements the enterprise CIO and developers to far more quickly bring to fruition initiatives, ensure that this historical gap that existed between developers and practitioners is removed, and thereby ensuring that these solutions address real business needs and deliver as expected, far more frequently than has been experienced in the past.
I like that, data wranglers. I've been on a world tour and passing through Nevada, and the term wranglers really resonates with me. But I really also love this idea of removing the gap between the developers and the practitioners, and I know that's always been a challenge. And, implementing these systems and trying to get data is very time-consuming and critical for procurement demonstrating its ROI. So, I do think that it's savvy. It probably doesn't matter what you call it, but having someone who can play that role between the technology group and the function, I can see from what you're both saying is really important. Let's now move to, sort of talking more about procurement's challenges with data. And I suppose the need for a role like yours, Ed, stems from the struggles procurement teams have today with managing their data. What are the biggest mistakes you see procurement teams making when it comes to data and analytics, and what's maybe causing people to sort of drown, if you like, in these data lakes or fail at the moment?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question. I've been fortunate enough to have enjoyed about 10 years now in transformation, and sadly, I must admit to you that I've made plenty of mistakes and have some lessons learned and smarter approaches in this regard. We have come to realize that, making mistakes is not the problem, believe it or not, right? It's rather the way it's done that makes all the difference in the world. This simply means that, the most significant challenges for team, of course, is managing data of all size and scale. And we would do this in a kind of an old waterfall methodology where we engage, as you said earlier, the development team, maybe put a full year's, drops for, capability in terms of the development and the use case cycle. And we plan that very carefully over a course of a year with investment dollars matched to those drops, et cetera. Now, that's great, and we're excited that, the enterprise will invest in procurement. But what is smarter is if we realize we do it in more agile chunks, right? And those drops are not quarterly or twice annually for the big bang, but rather maybe in weeks we'll run sprints and we'll have drops that are maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And what this immediately allows is a smaller, more manageable content. And then if you think about it, the old saying, well, if you're going to fail, let's fail early, and let's fail when we don't have to spend cost. Yeah, exactly. And let's not expend, a ton of dollars and then wait for that hockey puck, where it scoots up at the last 2 months to realize value. Can't we build in a process that's more iterative, more flexible, more nimble, more agile? And that way, if the client doesn't like exactly what they see, they give us that quick, immediate feedback, and we can course correct. A much smarter and much better way, Now, it's not to say that, waterfall doesn't have its place. Of course, it does. But, this is one of the biggest changes in IBM is adopting an agile methodology and developing code and releasing it, and procurement's no different. We're shoulder to shoulder with our organizations, our CIO, and our developers, and we have adopted and embraced this, right? And then another,
Sorry,
challenge
Ed,
we
if
have
I can just jump in there,
please.
and it's not just on technology projects, is it? I mean, from what I've heard, you're taking an agile approach to category management and all the projects procurement runs, and I think that's a real inspiration and something people can learn from as well, is, to really take, this sort of methodology that you see Google and all the software developers and actually apply it to procurement. Am I right there? Have I...
You're absolutely right. We to our leadership team at IBM, from Jim Cavanaugh down to Bob again, they've led this charge, and it's really resonating with the teams and having a tremendous positive impact with organizations that have already embarked on this path inside of IBM. So, we started in earnest, right, around, I'll say, January, as a kickoff for 2018, through category management, through operations, right, and through other areas of our business. We're actually pull work through, understand our workload, do it more quickly, and then, hold up our hand to say, our funnel is full, if you will, right? And we realize that the throughput is increasing, right, on how we do things. So, look, we're in early days. There's a lot to learn, but already IBM has realized tremendous value, and we're absolutely excited to be applying this across, Bob's full and complete portfolio of what he manages under his venue.
I mean, from talking to teams around the world, everyone's spending a lot of time analyzing and gathering data from probably too many sources, but they think that's what they should be doing. Everyone's been talking big data for so long and how important data is. But Marco, how do you think we can all use our time more wisely to ensure we get the ROI and we drive value for the business? And how do we make sure all this data is fit for purpose?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So much time spent gathering data. My response is actually going to sound very basic, and that is that you need to start. You need to start at the end and work backwards, if that makes sense. So really, it's first and foremost, you need to ask, what is the outcome or insights that you're trying to achieve? What are the business behaviors that you're trying to change? And as Eddie alluded to, we use design thinking practices to engage the user community early in the process and develop this joint understanding of, business requirements. From that, we work backwards to determine what data we need, how we acquire it, and what enrichment that data it requires. This way, not only are you gathering data that's fit for purpose, but you also consider the business process that drives that data and build improvements into those processes such that you ensure data quality and data consistency, through time. Of course, it doesn't stop there. Our role is to automate and create the infrastructure that takes the gathering, filtering, sorting of that data away from practitioners, and rather provide them with complete insights garnered from processing the data based on the requirements, that we gathered from this design thinking. So, for us, the practitioner can still get access to this raw data if needed for validation. And quite frankly, some folks just really like to get into the weeds and get into the data. But ideally, we don't want our practitioners spending time analyzing or shipping raw data, rather, looking at the results or processed insights. Now, one thing that I come across quite frequently, when we talk to people in the industry is, what drives this behavior of trying to gather all sorts of data. And very often, it's simply driven by wrong metrics or driven by misunderstanding of those metrics. For example, we hear of teams that are asked, how many price points do you have loaded in your analytics system? Just as an example. Not only does that create a false sense of success in terms of what that system can do for you, but it causes teams to spend time acquiring and loading data to meet this single objective, but not, much thought is given to the business insights that they actually need, right? And the reason for gathering that data. So I would summarize it like this. start with understanding the outcome you're trying to drive. Then you define the data you need, and where and how to acquire that. And the last point here is you absolutely have to make sure that you measure what really matters, such that you drive the right behaviors in data acquisition and move away from this concept that you talked about, where people are just acquiring a whole lot of data and not able to put it to good use, or not have an understanding of why they're acquiring it in the first place.
There's so many data sources out there as well, Marco. I think that's an issue, for everyone in this overload situation. Which sources is your team gathering from today?
Yeah, it's a really broad base of data, and it varies a little bit by category of spend as well. To give you some examples, our internal data, as you can imagine, starts with the fundamentals of, PO and invoice data, of course. We do look at RFX data, procurement and customer contracts, internal client demand and pipeline data. So you kind of get the sense that internally it's a very broad base of data, which includes procurement and or our clients. Externally, of course, market intelligence is a big one for us, and I'll categorize those into two. It's market intelligence from our MI providers, as well as market intelligence that's gathered from both structured and unstructured public data sources, social media, and various other sources that we gather the information from. And then the third one, and also very important, is data that we get from our suppliers. And very often this is around things like machine failure rates, product life cycles, configuration options, for example, within their products and or services. So as you can see, it is a broad base, but again, it's not about gathering all of that data or every single element for everyone, but rather targeted to achieve that specific objective. And as I said, always with that buy-in from the end users and what business outcome, they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Ed, we're looking for a hot tip here from you, I guess, when we're talking about data sources. Is there some data source that you're collecting from that others may not be collecting? So, in other words, do you have some hot tips on some really insightful data sources that we may not be aware of?
Well, I thought about this question, right? And, some of the names that I come up with, right, are your standard household names, right? And then I thought about the meaning behind this question. And those sources, just to fill in the blanks, Dun & Bradstreet, Cap IQ, Northern Lights, an aggregator, and the list goes on. But it's not so much the hot data source that may be the tip, but it's the way you use that data. Assembling the data in a coherent way where the buyers can literally have it at their fingertips, so they can take the external data sources that Marco was just speaking of, whether it's industry knowledge or market insights, or it's what business we're doing internally. In other words, creating a connection in a data set and passing that to the buyers so that they have a holistic kind of 360-degree view of what that supplier means. Up to IBM, for example, we have that capability. So I think assembling quickly, linking the data, and then presenting it to the buyer as a new user experience is where the power comes from. We get tremendous improvements in productivity. We have one capability, and I'm not selling, but it's called Supplier IQ, where it does exactly that, right? It'll pull in and ingest information from the web. It understands what the current, outlook and the health and the fitness of a company are. And it will also federate the internal spend, and it just improves the productivity where maybe a sourcing individual can do 3 or 4 sourcing events concurrently, where if they had to pull in and do all of that analysis before, it would have taken them all morning or all day to really understand what the total available market is, what the supply base is looking at. So it's more, I think, how we assemble for the user experience those data sets to improve the productivity and effectiveness of the buyer.
That's a great point, and we're going to talk about that in a little while, about how we present all this data. But before we move on there, I thought, Marco, we've touched on unstructured data throughout this conversation, but just in case nobody out there or some people out there don't know what unstructured data means, can you please explain that and why it's important that procurement makes sense of it?
Yeah, sure. So, probably the most common definition for unstructured data is data that is not organized or predefined, with data models. It's typically text-heavy data, and some examples would be for contract language, a periodical or journal that you might pick up and read, any website that you navigate to, and there's tremendous amounts of value in this data that's often unrealized, right? Just think of typical information that a strategist or practitioner consumes when they read or interpret contracts, white papers, magazines, news publications, and even things like tweets and social media. We make decisions every day without consciously thinking about it, based on unstructured data. Things like market sentiment, for example, to determine future price trends, or effects of that global and regional events will have on pricing and availability of products and services. These all influence and affect our strategies and sourcing decisions. But here's the problem. The human ability to assimilate and process all of that data is limited, right? Often by how much time we have, and quite frankly, by our processing capability, with this vast amount of data that we see now. So, conversely, our ability to use machines to ingest that data in far greater quantities than possible by any individual, interpret and filter it for important elements, and using the cognitive capabilities that exist now, turn that data into insights that augment the practitioner's decisions is, extremely powerful. Also, very important. Today, we can scan for this unstructured information globally, and we can update the effects that it has on the insights in real time, or at least near real time. That is game-changing if you think about it, versus the reactive nature of a practitioner engaging all of those sources, in some cases, days, weeks, months, or, if at all, right, after publication.
It's fascinating. You're right. It is all too much for us to process, and to be able to bring all that information together and to gain insights on, trends, issues, forecasting. It's amazing. I love the fact that IBM bought the Weather Channel, which must be, I guess that's a little bit more structured than totally unstructured data, but it's still forecasting. Ed, how much help has that Weather Channel data been for your supply chain planning?
Yeah, well, the Weather Channel brought huge amounts of data and insights, right? Just the daily volume in order to produce and broadcast and weather forecasts is absolutely astronomical, right? It was a learning experience. And I never knew that the power of its accuracy is actually, when we actually combine all the data, at a zip code level to create these forecasts that make for a more robust forecast. It's amazing to me. But what procurement has taken advantage of is really the rich capability by developing an application, we call Risk Insights, where we, use our cognitive capability, right, to predict, where that forecast is going to be. We can understand what our supply base is that would be and experience really a weather event, right, that may disrupt supply. And then through this, capability, this Risk Insights tool I'm alluding to, it even passes alerts to the buyer. So where does the planning come in? The planning comes in is where we can really understand, what are the patterns, what are the risks, do we need to plan more in terms of a dual sourcing strategy for those suppliers that are near and dear, right, to the parts or the services that are provided, and come up with, mitigating type of strategies, and then understanding that going forward has been tremendously helpful for the team. So we're able to take data, convert it to risk manage it, and then alter, sourcing strategies by ingesting and having a full view of a historical experiences for weather-related events.
Well, I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of our listeners who have been impacted, by extreme events around the world. Now that we're all managing such global supply chains, floods in Thailand, the tsunami, a lot of us have all lived through these things, and they've wiped out, whole chunks of our supply chain. It was only then when we found out, everyone was located in that one area. I think we've all learned a lot in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So I think the weather is a critical part for all our supply chain planning. Now, earlier we touched on analysing and presenting data, and Marco, I'd like to explore this a little bit more with you. I was talking to a leading procurement consultant the other day, and he was musing how much everyone still used Excel, even for like the most important, complex contract management information. And Ed earlier talked about the multiple price points, and there's just so much information on some of these big contracts that we need to manage. Do you think the profession as a whole relies too heavily on Excel? What does IBM use to manipulate its data?
Yeah, it's true. We do see a tendency for some certainly to turn to Excel, and I guess that's going to take time, right? People default, to what they're used to. We've looked at how people manipulate data in Excel, and it's interesting because the majority of the time, the actual value add that they inject into the data or insights is actually very limited compared to the perception that they have of the value that it brings them.
You must have seen me with an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, and look, I'm generalizing, right? As they obviously, there are the folks that know their way around Excel and can do some fantastic things, but the vast majority tend to do pretty basic operations once they export the data into Excel. On top of that, of course, there's always the risk, and we see it happening, that they introduce mistakes into the data insights, either because, of their limitations on Excel, or, because they're joining data sets incorrectly, apply suboptimal data logic. And probably one of the worst things is that we see folks repeating the same exercise over and over manually every time when they need to refresh this data, at month end or quarter end, which really makes little to no sense. We do use Excel where it's appropriate. I'd be lying if I said we didn't use Excel. But our strategy is to create an environment where the practitioner can access the data they need and have the ability to interact with that data, altering parameters and filters, even to some extent the look and feel while, they're within the reporting system. Thus eliminate as much as possible the need for them to extract to Excel. Now, one of the primary reasons we do that, and really, really important, is that you're always looking for a trusted source of truth when you query and output data. And having it in a system rather than export it to Excel, goes a long way towards giving you that. It also means that, the creation and refresh of insights is automated, freeing that practitioner so that they can focus on their core business rather than, manipulating the data, which I think is the smart thing to do. As far as tools within IBM, of course, as you can imagine, we use Watson Analytics and Cognos Analytics as our primary tools for that presentation and enrichment as well. And, both of these have proved extremely powerful, but also flexible. So it gives us that flexibility and it gives us that buy-in because you have the practitioner able to, manipulate, right, within reason, the data and still maintain the integrity of it.
Well, hopefully some of our listeners out there have some of those tools, and obviously if they go on the cognitive journey, that would help them a lot as well. Ed, we talked about visualization before of this data, and I guess we're now getting to the influencing skills, the part where you've got some interesting data and some insights, but then how do you present that to your stakeholders in such a way that you can convince them to, walk the path with you? So what do you think the best way to present data back to stakeholders is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of components that are really important here, and one of the things historically the procurement practitioner hasn't done so well is been completely transparent with the data and present the data where it's so simple and clear to understand that the outcomes are obvious. The best dashboard, the best chart in the world is when you do not have to explain, right? Where the messages are absolutely clear. And I don't want to be prescriptive, but I would recommend to the team, look, from a design practices, perspective, and we talk to the professionals who do this for a living, they say, make sure the outcomes are clear, your progress is clear, update monthly so you're staying connected and you can engage and interlock with your client, set up that cadence. But when you do that, have just 3 or 4 relevant facts on the chart graphed out in a most effective way, right? And one way to make sure that you are embraced and that you have a partner in the stakeholder side is, again, make them part of that design thinking view, create a low fidelity rendering, have them map out what are the most relevant facts, what are the most relevant trends that they want to see, and then you can discuss and collaboratively work up, what that should look like so that when they see it on a monthly basis, they're seeing exactly what their expectations are. And now rather than, what we've done historically as professionals, we spend 80% of our time, creating the data, getting ready for the meeting, where we can invert that pyramid, where we can spend maybe 10 or 20% of the time, really analyzing the data and then explaining and showcasing to the client what the most important message on the chart is, or what actionable insights that we can actually collaboratively go work that problem and drive some improved outcomes to help their revenue and profitability. So those are a couple of tips that I would say in a visualization space.
That's right. I mean, it's a great tip for collaboration because the more you invest behind the scenes in researching your data and having your position, the more wedded you are to it, aren't you? So when you then get in front of your stakeholder, you're sort of less inclined to collaborate or move on it. If we sort of pulled the data, had some insights, and then went in for a discussion or a conversation with our stakeholder, it's a much more collaborative and conducive atmosphere, isn't it?
Exactly. You've taken away all of the clunkiness that sometimes happens in our meetings when we engage stakeholders, and you can get right to the meat of the discussion of what we're going to do to improve our enterprise, right?
Right. Well, look, we're almost coming to the end of the conversation, so I really wanted to try and bring this all together for our listeners. So, Ed, let's say I'm managing the contingent labour category for my company. What sort of data should I be collecting, and how should I be using that information to drive change within my organisation?
I'm glad you asked me this question too. When we began transforming IBM, we created the actual council structure, and I had the opportunity to enjoy that role. So I would say we should, I would recommend that a category lead or manager, follow, the kind of 3-step process, right? I think, we always have to make sure that we're capturing rich and meaningful data, right? So I would say, understanding what that data is between yourself and the stakeholder is one of the first steps. Creating a taxonomy between the supplier, the internal stakeholder, right, and the procurement team, so you're all talking about the same thing, the same language. And don't be shy about investing time in the beginning of that process, because if you think about it from an end-to-end digitization of your process, if your RFQs have that common taxonomy, that way for us to all talk in one language, then when we're talking about how to optimize or maximize the data and its insights, it's an easier discussion with your stakeholders. So investing and understanding that first in the digital process is key. And then the second step is I would, work with the internal data management team to make sure that you're going to develop a capability, move off of those Excels that we had talked about, invest in an industrialized data dashboard, right, that has meaning to the client and the procurement team, and make it very easy to execute, easy to engage your client on a frequent basis, right? And then, making sure that you, thirdly, and the most important thing is all of this transformation, all of this discussion today about, digital and data is to drive outcomes. So set up those engagement meetings, right, with your internal stakeholder. Make sure you have your eye on the ball for outcomes and that you're marching, to that end state. And then finally sharing that with your own internal transformation team and showcasing that, with those in the broader organization, to make sure you drum up some excitement so you can generate, for next year's investment portfolio and keep the ball moving, right, as you develop your capabilities as an organization.
Oh, that's fantastic, really practical advice. We'll capture those and share those with the listeners. Thank you, Ed. I guess it's my final question, and Marco, I'll throw to you first, and then we'll give Ed the final word. I don't know if that's dangerous, but we'll live on the edge. So to wrap up, I guess, could each of you really give us some final advice on how procurement pros listening today can be a data hunter rather than a gatherer? Marco.
Yeah, sure. And, I'm going to repeat on some of the things that we touched on just because I'm really passionate about these 3 points. So first and foremost, listen to the voice of the client, right? Start with an understanding of what you're trying to solve, really understand what the practitioner's needs are, and work backwards from there to determine what data you need. I cannot stress that enough. The voice of the client, absolutely critical. Second one, I'd say, is focus on data quality, and ensure that your procurement processes enable the acquisition and enrichment of good quality data. It sounds very obvious, but it is so often overlooked, and it causes tremendous frustration in the system. So, data quality, absolutely critical. And then finally, I'd say you have to create a single trusted source of data such that your practitioners that are accessing any one of your tools or capabilities do so with extremely high level of confidence, that they're accessing that one source of truth that they can base their business decisions on. I would say those 3 are, near and dear to my heart and absolutely critical for success.
Ed, what's your final piece of advice?
Yeah, I think that, Marcos touched on the foundational elements of what it takes to stand up, a solid data management and analytic team. I would stretch the folks on the team and leave them with, provocative thought is, the deeper analysis, the next turn of the crank. Our clients are actually asking us to help improve their enterprise by optimizing all of the costs inside the organization, or developing solutions that are more cost effective so they can compete more effectively in the marketplace. To do that, we actually will go a little bit deeper and create decision support tools. So I believe by collaborating with your client to understand perhaps if there are alternatives out there, can I view those? Do I see the history behind that kind of capability, so that we're actually making our way up the value chain, becoming consultants, actually, if you will, right, to the stakeholders, and bringing greater value where they say, wow, this data will help me price a job out or a solution differently. Or, I didn't know I had these alternatives. Or this proposal, I think we could do better because we have historically at the fingertip and on the ready. It leaves such a positive impression on our stakeholders where they want to embrace the procurement individual time and again, and that really showcases the value, of the organization.
Okay, gentlemen, well, thank you very much for your time today. We've gone from sort of data being a backroom sort of function need to have to it actually helping elevate the status of procurement and add more value. Who would have thought? In 40 short minutes.
We've got 15 minutes left to answer a few of the listener questions that have been coming in whilst we've been talking. Our first question is from Germany, and I think I'll direct this to you, Ed. What are the differences between a chief data and a chief digital officer? Is one focusing on data, the other more on processes, or is it just 2 different names for similar roles? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I believe it's the latter. I do believe it's fundamentally the same thing, but I can talk to the scope of what we're conceiving of to be in the chief data officer role for IBM. We were, fundamentally trying to drive an overall data strategy for IBM. And as part of the data strategy, of course, digitizing the end-to-end process, making sure that our buyers, our suppliers, and our stakeholders, for example, are speaking in one taxonomy, so that when we go forward and mine the data, we retrieve that data so it has the greatest value. So it's more on the principles, I believe, in the value that the role of Chief Data Officer for IBM is delivering, and not so much on just the focus on digitizing the process alone.
I hope that answers our very eye-opening question from Germany, a good place to start. But why don't we stay with you, Ed? We're in a question now from the United Kingdom. Do you have any tips for how we as individual procurement managers can work with stakeholders to increase the rate and pace of cognitive adoption?
Yes, this is a great question too, and it comes up frequently, right? And it speaks to the overarching discussion on transformation, right? Part of our job as supply chain and procurement leaders, right, is to invoke change across the broad audience, right? Reach out to our people and create change. And the fundamentals of change management principles, I think, apply here as well. So what I've been, and how I think I should answer this for the team here, is we need to make those that are going to participate in whatever cognitive component or digital strategy that's in place, make them partners in the process, right? So if they understand and we have the right tone, and I suppose I should have said it doesn't hurt in IBM when your CEO stands in front of the broad IBM 360,000 employees and declares that we're going to start a new cognitive era. So a slight edge there, but you get the idea.
That's really compelling.
Yes, it is. So, you get the idea. Start at the top. Get your senior leaders behind the push, and that's not really that hard to do, right? And get their buy-in, and then make those individuals from the bottom of the organization, on up, partners in change, right? So as they make certain milestones, certain achievements, we recognize them, and we know this is a journey, right? This cognitive components isn't a plug and play. It will take work and time to develop, create your domain, your corpus of knowledge, if you will, your expert knowledge base, and then build on that, right? So I think that's what what I would turn the team on to, is that approach.
And Ed, you've given everyone some great advice today about engaging stakeholders. It's been really pragmatic, so thank you for that. Now, Marco, I don't want to leave you hanging there. We've got a question from Scotland. Are you having to do much work on the data team to present the data in a usable way to buyers?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer in two ways here. The short answer is yes. We do absolutely need to do, enrichment and normalization to the data within the data team. I will tell you, we try and minimize that by doing as much of the improvements within the procurement process, right? So how, does the team engage the marketplace, and how does the team create an environment where you're acquiring good data at the start? It's not as difficult as it sounds. It just really requires a little bit of diligence and understanding from the practitioners. And then as far as, the data team and the enrichment that they go through, typically it's enriching for things, making sure that names are normalized and standardized, so that when you hear a name or you query a name, it's the same name, across the organization. Units of measure, those sort of things. And that enrichment typically is automated through scripting and other, automation techniques. So I would say, yes, there is work to enrich it, but, I would say the vast majority of it is through, automation and robotics.
Ed, we've got another question from the UK, which I think continues to build on the stakeholder engagement piece. The question is, how would you best suggest sharing data with your internal teams if they don't have time to read the countless reports?
Yeah, I think, as an organization, a procurement profession, we're a little guilty here, right? Historically,
we would send large reports that were hard to truly understand to not only our internal people, but sometimes, sadly, even to our stakeholders, right? And they say, well, the first thing they would say to us is, tell me what's important. What does this mean to me, right? And I think our buyers echo the same kind of, sentiments and concerns. So what we adopt now is let's try to think through and put to work what we call persona-driven reports, right? If I'm going to get data, I want it tailored and have the most important data I'm after available and visible to me. And when I look at it, it should be obvious. I shouldn't have to struggle through understanding where's the value, what are the insights, what are the outcomes I'm driving to. It kind of should be self-evident, right? And one last tip here, a recommended approach is, upfront, make a small investment in time. Collaborate with those that are going to be the recipients of these reports. Sit down and do a low fidelity rendering of what that thing should look like, and get their buy-in. It's like a crit-sit situation, cognitive consonance dissonance. If I give you what you ask for, you must be happy and see the value. So, I would just a little design thinking hidden tip I would offer up in this space. Okay.
I love that low fidelity rendering of what you need. That's very powerful, as well as the concept of personas, because of course salespeople are using this all the time, and we need to adopt the same sort of approach. So I think that could be the topic of a whole other webinar, which is stakeholder personas. I'm sure we'd get a lot of input on that, both the good and the bad. Marco, we've got a question from Australia. Could you explain some use cases solved by data scientists in the advanced analytics area of procurement? That is, besides the standard categorization machine learning space. Have you got any examples there?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. So, the data scientists have been critical for us on some of these cognitive elements. One of them in particular, is for example, for me as a practitioner, when I'm engaging on a deal, of course, one of the things that I try and do is ascertain what is the target price, right? What am I willing to pay for goods or services? Well, the data scientists have been critical for us here in getting all of this unstructured data, the structured data sources as well, combining those into price prediction models for the practitioners that they can use on their fly as they engage these, the marketplace. And that involves, using historical pricing, price influencing factors, things that you and I think of as procurement buyers, that would influence price now and into the future, market sentiment. And, it really takes that sort of data science approach and mentality and tool suite, to harness all of that data into these predictive models. The same is true. You heard me talking about market sentiment. What is market sentiment? It's reading a vast amount of unstructured data in various, websites and periodicals, interpreting that, interpreting human language and translating that into insights that then, we use in these predictive models or that the buyers use, to understand what the sentiment is. And the data scientists have been absolutely crucial for us in, building the models and fine-tuning the models, so that it learns over time.
Marco, while you're on a roll, one of our other questions is whether you're using Scrum workshops or similar methodologies to speed up development and be more agile. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's pretty well known. IBM has been going through this transformation across the enterprise to move to, agile practices and principles, and procurement's no different. We've been, through this transition. So it's not just development, activities that use Scrum and agile methodologies, but rather it's a cultural thing across the organization. That said, within development, absolutely, we try and always start with design thinking. You heard in the webinar I was talking about, earlier about the voice of the client. And that is absolutely critical part of Scrum, right, is have the client at the engagement level when you start the engagement, go through design thinking. And then we absolutely create the environment of Scrum, short iterations, deliver value quickly, and understand and course correct if, that's needed. And I think Ed mentioned it. If you're going to fail early, right? And that is absolutely what we want to do when we're trying to push, the envelope in terms of developing new capabilities and trying new things.
I know that was a key topic when we spoke to your team about beating the bots and how we have to develop soft skills, and that becoming more agile is going to be so important for procurement. And one of the other questions we have, Marco, I might keep you on a roll, is what do we have to do to qualify or develop our procurement staff? Are we simply adding data scientists or techies to our teams, or are we going to develop our existing talent?
Yeah, it is developing existing talent, and it's developing them on a number of fronts. So one is absolutely making them more aware of data and how they can help, as I said earlier, in that acquisition of data and so on. So that is important, as well as the utilization of the tools. But then there is the other part. Why do we implement these tools and these capabilities is so that we enable our practitioners to become more consultants to the business, right? And I think part of the transformation or the knowledge enhancement for our practitioners is twofold: data side and analytics. But then there's the other softer side of how do you partake more in this consultative type environment with our clients and bring that value add, right, using the tools and the capabilities.
Thank you for that. I know that's a hot topic for a lot of people who feel like their jobs may be made redundant. But Ed, maybe if we finish with you, and this is a question from Germany, is whether you have a light version that might be more affordable or applicable for SMEs.
Okay, great. Let me set the table just for a second. Part of my role and responsibility is to serve the internal stakeholders for IBM. We call it the enterprise side of the business, as well as we do service about 40 or 50 different clients. We sell services. So, well over $70 billion worth of spend, annually that we have responsibility for. So in that portfolio, that broad portfolio, right, we have small, medium, and large types of clients. So this kind of need comes up routinely. And we do have a offering that does scale to a small, medium and large client. We do start with the data cleansing that we can, have a nimble, smaller process where you can drop your data sets into a Dropbox vis-a-vis a template so that we ingest the right data for the right size and scale. And then we put together and exercise our enrichment capabilities. We have some cognitive enrichment tools where we can then go, cleanse then the next step in the process to enrich it, and then finally stand that up in a dashboard that's, visually to the liking and desires, right, of the team. And we can do that in fairly short order. That data set, is going to provide the insights and the outcomes that the team wants to. So this thing scales, right? This offering scales because, again, serving that kind of client base, you need to have small, medium, and large. And in fact, we do. So that is out there, and we call that, Watson supply chain insights with our services as a service. So, I can take that going forward, but that capability does exist.
Well, thank you, and thank you both. I'd just like to say one final thank you for both you and Ed Marco joining us today. For those of you who are listening, if you'd like to listen to this webinar again or share it with your colleagues and peers, it will be available on the Procurious Learning area from tomorrow. And if you have any further questions for our speakers, please don't hesitate to ask them in our discussion board, and we'll ensure it gets answered for you. Following our discussion, I hope you're all feeling really empowered to transform your data strategy and embrace the mindset of a data hunter. Many thanks for joining us today.